Red Planet Odyssey. Humanity's Quest for Mars. A special project by students of Create and Learn. Authors. Leo. Chapter 1. Sakura. Chapter 2. Jonah. Chapter 3. August. Chapter 4. Susie. Chapter 5. Dejana. Chapter 6. Adrian. Chapter 7. Nicholas. Chapter 8. Ivy. Chapter 9. Athon. Chapter 10. Introduction. The success of a risky crewed mission to Mars will depend on its team members working well together and complementing each other's talents. The international team of young authors that wrote this exciting book demonstrated a very high level of teamwork and creativity. They also displayed great style and vision by collaboratively developing a very interesting and entertaining story about humankind's quest to establish a permanent presence on Mars. It has been my privilege to be their guide throughout this process. Their stories are original, unique and very thought-provoking. Congratulations to the authors. I look forward to the sequel. Bruce Callow. April, 2022. Crew. 1. Grzegorz Brzezinski George, Poland, sanitation engineer, PE instructor. 2. Johan Chen, China, communications officer/co-pilot. 3. Robert Green, USA, electrical engineer/pilot. 5. Auguste Francais, France, medical doctor/microbiologist. 4. Francesca Lucy, Italy, microbiologist/archaeologist. 6. Brianna Marsden, Canada, mission commander/chef. 7. Bobby Ziggy Brown, NOAA fixed country, billionaire slacker, he financed the mission. Chapter 1, Beginnings. How do we even do that? It had been all afternoon and people have been saying things like that to Johnson Griffiths. It all started when he had an idea when sitting in an office at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL. It was probably the best idea in the history of mankind. Therefore, NASA headquarters decided they were going to have a meeting about this idea. When he was telling people about this, though, people were thinking it would be almost impossible to get it right. And when he told random people on the streets, people would just think he was crazy. After an hour of convincing people that it was possible, the meeting was starting, and he was going to explain his idea in detail. He said that the idea was to build a rocket and use that rocket to go to Mars. The rocket would be a reusable rocket for future missions. It would also have multiple small engines for correcting its path through space. Then, the astronauts would land on Mars and build a Mars base there. He also said that the Mars base's shape would be a geodesic dome for sturdiness. After he had convinced the people at the meeting that the mission was doable, the meeting ended. NASA headquarters had decided the idea was good enough, so they were going to design a mission based on it. Jose was thrilled to know that NASA finally accepted his idea. I couldn't believe it, finally people are believing the mission is possible. Over the next weeks, NASA had found out that they needed other countries' help. They had calculated that they would need at least 106 countries to be involved to secure enough money, material, and people, and ideas, but some countries were at war, so they planned to pick the countries carefully. If some of the countries disagreed, then they would repeat the process again. A couple of months later, when NASA repeated the whole process 6 times, the countries were chosen, and 97 countries signed the contract willingly. So far so good, said Jose Gonzalez, IT manager at NASA headquarters, smiling a bit. We've done the preparation part, and what's left to do is to build, test, and launch. The next day, NASA decided that they would build the capsule first. The capsule would be huge. It would have 2 zones, a human zone and a material zone. The human zone would carry 7 astronauts on board, plus the instruments to control the capsule and rocket in space. The material zone, which was even larger than the human zone, would store all the things the astronauts need, including food. Most importantly, the material zone could open up into an inflatable translucent semi-spherical chamber that stored all the things in it, kind of like a Martian garage. Plus, it also had a channel that could connect to the Mars base itself. Now, NASA had decided to build the human zone first. After getting the materials, they fused a couple of copper and steel pieces together to form a flipped-over funnel shape, but with the tube part removed. They did this 3 times, each time fusing the funnel to the last funnel they made and sucking the air out in the middle. This would make the intense heat outside unable to go inside. All of this took NASA and the other countries about 3 months to do this. After that they were building the seats for the astronauts. The seats would be very comfortable to sit on, that is, comfortable compared to other seats in spacecrafts, and could be changed according to the astronaut that sits on the seat. This meant that the seats needed bigger space, which meant smaller computers because then the rocket would have less weight to carry. So, the 106 countries needed to develop some kind of super small technology. So then the countries spent 7 months figuring out the super small tech when finally they figured it out and put it in use with the computers. Now, they could build the seats. The seats had to absorb more than 80% of the force of impact or the astronauts would feel uncomfortable. This required some kind of anti-shock technology, which took NASA, and the other countries, about a week to figure out. After constructing the seats, the countries moved on to the computers in the capsule. This was now very easy, because they had already developed the computers, they just needed to build them. Chapter 2, Teamwork. The multinational crew of 7 were selected from an available group of 635 astronauts and 1 international billionaire slacker. Most of them are from the NASA class of 2028 group called the Butterflies. The candidates came from all around the world because the Mars mission needed the best. Brianna Marsden and Johan Chen were talking about when they all went to Death Valley to train. They were training in Death Valley because it looks like Mars, has a rocky surface, it's hilly, and it has sandstorms. They also trained on trampolines, underwater and flew up on the Vomit Comet so they could feel like they're experiencing zero gravity. It was so much fun, it went by so fast and I wanted to do more. No one got sick and it was super crazy, said Brianna. Billionaire slacker Ziggy contributed something important to the mission by bringing a 3D printer that prints food that is delicious and tastes like the food that they have on Earth, so the crew wouldn't have to eat dry meat, seeds or other foods. Instead they could eat whatever they want, and the 3D printer took about 10 to 20 minutes to print out the thing that the astronauts want to print out because the 3D printer was very advanced. While Brianna and Johan were talking, Robert the pilot/engineer, just remembered the time when he was building the rovers and mini helicopters. It was so much work and I was really nervous that it might not achieve our goals, he thought. Robert had helped to build 16 rovers and 45 mini helicopters that had contributed this crewed mission to Mars. Dr. Auguste Francais, the medical doctor and microbiologist, was taking care of Francesca Lucy to check that a new virus had not infected her. They did not have any cure for that disease yet and it was surprising that Francesca may be sick because everyone had been in quarantine before the mission. Fortunately, there was a thing called a space mask that protected everyone else from getting the disease. George had a newborn child so he wanted to communicate with his family as much as he could. George could make a video for his family but it would take up to 20 minutes for them to receive the message. Since George was really busy he could only send a message to his family every other day. All of the astronauts' families and friends were excited, happy and nervous. They were also sad because they knew that they're not going to see the astronauts for about 2 or 3 years because of the mission. Chapter 3. The Liftoff. It is almost time to go to space. The crew is excited about their mission to Mars. Mars has ice caps, clouds, wind, and storms just like Earth. They are interested to find out if these similarities to Earth mean they might find signs of Martian life. After waiting 2 extra years for supplies, fuel, and backup gear they are ready to go to Mars. Mars is the red planet because it looks red and rocky to people on Earth. On launch day, it is a July evening at 5 p.m. All of the astronauts are excited for the big day. Francesca Lucy, Bobby Ziggy Brown, Grzegorz Brzezinski, Johan Chen, Robert Green, Dr. Auguste Francais, and Brianna Marsden are all ready. Their spacesuits will keep them at the perfect temperature. They go to the rocket, the Dominator 1. Millions of people are watching in person and millions more are watching at home. The countdown begins. 10_9_8_7_6_5 4_3_2 Main engine start 1_ ignition and liftoff of the Dominator 1. It feels like being on a roller coaster. They get pushed back in their seats. Everyone shouts. They look out their window and see the planet they live on. They are all excited and nervous. They all wonder what it will be like on Mars. They also wonder if they will get back to Earth. It takes 9 months to get to Mars. As a couple days pass, they are getting used to the schedule and trying new food like freeze-dried ice cream. At 6 a.m., it is wake-up time. If an astronaut sleeps in, they call Mission Control to play Baby Shark over and over to wake them up. One day, Bobby sleeps late. He is awoken by the annoying music. The astronauts wake up hungry. Luckily they have breakfast from 6 until 7 a.m. on the lower deck. Then it's time for exercise from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. and you need lots of exercise in space. I am not doing that, says Bobby, who never wants to follow the rules. From 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., they eat lunch. They eat foods like fruits and veggies like they do on Earth. Then they need a break. They get one from 11 a.m. until noon. The astronauts enjoy reading books, watching movies and listening to music. They have to talk to Mission Control to check in. They do that from 1 to 2 p.m. Is everything going well? Asks Mission Control. Mind your own business, says Bobby. Bobby is also rude. The astronauts do not like this, but they have to exercise from 2 to 5 p.m. There is no way I'm doing that, says Bobby. You have to, says Brianna Marsden. I can do whatever I want. No. PPPT, whatever. After that, the astronauts are hungry, so they have dinner from 5 to 6 p.m. After a long day, they go to sleep. After a few weeks they notice that Bobby has not followed the rules once. Listen guys, someone has to tell Bobby to stop, says Brianna. We will not let Bobby do that anymore. Today was the day they would put an end to Bobby's behavior. I do not have to do anything, says Bobby as he turns off the gravity. 8 months passed and they still cannot stop Bobby. Earth and the Moon are unseeable, but Mars is just ahead. One more week and they will arrive on Mars. At least I still have the ride home to misbehave, thinks Bobby. Landing on Mars in 10 minutes, says Mission Control. This is one of the most dangerous parts of the trip. You can easily crash. They are about to land on Mars. Buckle in, said Brianna Marsden. We have a landing. Everyone shouts. Chapter 4, The First 60 Days. The crew has just landed on Mars. They are all very excited. They are giving high fives to everyone. They are celebrating. The crew messaged Mission Control saying we have made it, and everyone celebrated and cheering could be heard from the radio. There was lots of work that the crew needed to do. Supply carts were unloaded from the capsules. The physician and microbiologist, Dr. Auguste Francais, is doing medical examinations and reports on the crew. The crew's health was good after the landing. The electrical engineer, Robert Green, is working on ensuring that all the equipment checks are up to date. No issues to report. Mission Control helped send out an international announcement. Classes and work were requested to stop to hear and watch the adventures on Mars, and they will continue to have regular live videos of the work on Mars. First public words from Mars were made by Dr. Auguste Francais, the microbiologist and physician. We are excited to announce the landing on Mars and let's start working. Dr. Auguste Francais. Biggest discovery, he finds worms. The first 60 days, souls, on Mars were bustling with activity. The electrical engineer, Robert Green, along with the archaeologist, Francesca Lucy, were constructing the mission base and greenhouse. They were digging dirt for the garden, looking for and melting ice, obtained from the North Pole through drilling, to use for plant irrigation. Dr. Auguste Francais started digging soil and rocks for samples. The samples were brought back to the base lab. Auguste sat down on his chair and started viewing the samples under a microscope. Auguste started shouting with excitement, for all to hear, "I found worms." This was a huge discovery, and extremely helpful to start the process of the greenhouse. Robert Green's construction continued with the building of base camp for the astronauts, which used a geodesic dome made of glass. As you enter the dome you will see the lab, with a counter with a microscope as well as a bench. Slides of Earth soil to compare with Mars soil and beakers are being filled with a variety of elements from Mars. Mars Astronaut Base. Dr. Auguste Francais then walks into the greenhouse-attached corridor to another geodesic dome filled with shelves of different seedlings and heat lamps. Out of the greenhouse you will walk to your left and see the astronauts' living quarters made up of individual rooms, and they have a shared bathroom. To the right is the commercial kitchen with all the stainless steel appliances. Outside of the domes, you will find a rectangular wooden shed constructed to hold the Mars rover and other supplies. The Mars rover is a silver-coated dune buggy, two-seater, very similar to the lunar car. On the helicopter pads, sit the two largest cargo helicopters that are used to transport the Mars rover and other supplies. The components were transported from Earth and assembled on Mars. It was decided to use the same designs as military helicopter because of their size and strength. They are all excited to find more discoveries of what could grow on Mars and conduct further scientific experiments. Mars cargo helicopters. Mars dune buggy. Chapter 5, Bobby misses dinner. If they were to grow a plant on Mars, would it work? To test this hypothesis, they sent George and Robert to try it out. Since Bobby needed exercise, he had gone on a very important mission to try growing plants with a hydroelectric system. But Francesca found him muttering to himself while sleeping on his shovel. If some plants did work, would the other plants not? Intending to grow plants on Mars with Martian soil, George quickly dug a hole and put the potato seeds in the ground. He put a thermal shield to protect the plants from the cold. Then he watered them. Instantly they popped up. George jumped back surprised. He jotted down notes. What could make them grow so fast? Meanwhile, Bobby was supposed to be training in the spacious workout room, but instead Bobby was having an interesting conversation to himself. Zzzzzzzzzzzzzzzzzzz, went Bobby. He had finally woken up when the recognizable dinner bell rang. He ate messily while one of the astronauts suspiciously glared at him. After dinner, all the astronauts got calls except August and Bobby. August didn't have anyone to call at home and deeply felt left out. Bobby didn't call his fiancée because he was busy stealing cake and sleeping. When Francesca had left home, her puppy had been a baby, but through FaceTime she had realized that her sweet puppy was turning into an independent, young adult. Unlike Francesca, George's baby girl was not participating in the idea of FaceTime. Most of the astronauts were frequently occupied by FaceTiming their pets. The next morning, while NASA was talking to their 7 brave astronauts, NASA asked if the crew wouldn't mind if they replaced the astronauts' pets with artificial intelligence robots instead of hogging FaceTime with daily calls. John immediately replied, no. The others agreed. They said to NASA, you cannot replace a pet, just like you can't replace a human. It is preposterous. Still on call with NASA, George told them about the experiment with the potatoes. After lunch, the 7 were supposed to be working out, but again Bobby slept through it. This time, he woke up when John quickly barged in. Bobby was outraged. How am I supposed to get any exercise, he yelled. John said, NASA wants us to go get samples and analyze them. Bobby was still mad, but he got over it. Dinner was next after they got the samples. He was starving. He had only eaten 9 slices of cake. He slowly walked after John, trying desperately to hurry. He did not want to be late for dinner. Tonight was cake and ice cream for dessert. The ice cream would have Oreo crumbs, sprinkles, and hot fudge. When they finished analyzing the Mars surface, Bobby had made it seconds too late. All the toppings had been eaten. Bobby was angry. He angrily yelled at John. He said, this is all your fault for making me analyze that useless sample. Next, he yelled at Brianna, the chef, for not making more delicious toppings and more magnificent food. The chef calmly said, thank you for complimenting my magnificent food, but you don't need to yell it. You should not treat your commander like that unless you want to get kicked out. Bobby solemnly said, you're right. I'm sorry. Bobby went to his dorm. When Bobby had been taking a nice, relaxing nap, his phone rang. Bobby felt too lazy to pick it up. It was his fiancée trying to tell him she was engaged to Frank, his old college buddy. After Bobby had finally cooled down, he apologized to John. NASA called and asked if the 7 brave astronauts were prepared for their next mission. Chapter 6, The Search for Extraterrestrial Life. The crew had been doing a lot of work, and they still needed to do more. But there was always a few breaks. But when Francesca Lucy looked down at her work, something didn't seem right. All day she tried to figure out what it was, remembering all the work she needed to do. It all started when she looked outside and saw Earth. It was really faint, but it seemed clear to her. Then someone yelled, Francesca, come and help. She recognized the voice. It was her friends from the crew calling her. She got up from the soft cushion she was sitting on. She came pouting, bummed that her friends disrupted her peaceful thinking time. When Auguste Francais saw her pouting, he pouted. Then she laughed. Then he laughed. Then she pouted. Then he laughed. They kept on doing it until Francesca could ask, okay, what are we doing? Still giggling. We're looking for aliens, Auguste explained. We saw a mysterious rock yesterday that had an alien writing drawn on it. Francesca gave him a face. Is this? She threw her hands in the air. Alien more important than me getting a foot massage? Everyone laughed, while Francesca's face fell. She had different work to do, because she had been asked to fix a few rovers that were dusty, and she had lots of work to do, which meant she couldn't finish her game of Minecraft. But now she had double, because when you find aliens, there's a lot more work you need to do. She rolled her eyes and walked back to her room and looked outside. There was a pretty view of space up in the sky, and Francesca liked that her room was a very quiet and peaceful place. She stayed calm, danced her heart out in her little room. Cushion. Francesca waved trying to get her cushion which was flying in the air. Bonk. She hit her head on the ceiling, but dived back down. PSH. The cushion landed on her head. She smiled, laughed, picked it off, and had to uncomfortably stand like a tree for the rest of the hour or else the same thing would happen again. As she stood, she thought about a few questions. Is this an evil spurt? What is this mysterious voice? Is the alien what's bothering me? She really only thought about the last question, because it seemed right to her and the first one spooked her out and the second one made no sense. She spent the next hour trying to put on eyeshadow and lipstick while floating upside down. For some reason, she liked challenging herself. The funniest part, according to her, was when her palette floated away and bonked her head. After she took lots of silly selfies, #makeup goals, and showed them to the rest of the team and they all laughed out loud. Chapter 7, Mud. The crew started to pack all their provisions and samples that were taken and collected during their research on Mars. Commander Mars assigned tasks to everyone including Bobby, Slacker. The commander said, "You have to move faster. Otherwise we might lose some samples, because a thunderstorm is coming." Dr. Auguste Francais started to pack his worms and nothing more. A few hours later a tornado arrived. The entire crew was gathered in the kitchen for a small break. All were tired after a long day of packing, preparing and checking if everything is fine and ready for the return journey back to Earth. "Let's eat something," Francesca Lucy proposed. "We still have some vegetables that we grew." "Great idea," said Commander Mars. "We can't take it all back to Earth." Grzegorz Brzezinski opened the pantry. "Oh no!" He yelled, "worms are everywhere." August didn't secure them well. The crew tried to save as much food as they could, but Dr. Francais was saving only worms, which had become an obsession for him. An hour later everyone was exhausted and no one was in the mood to do anything. Worms ate half the supplies that they had for the way back. Francesca Lucy asked, "What are we going to do now, Captain?" But there was no answer. "We will have to grow more food before we leave," said Grzegorz. "If we start now, it will not take long." The entire crew agreed. After the storm everyone went outside and saw that the entire place was covered in sand and at that moment someone yelled, "The fuel tanks are gone." The staff started running around looking for the fuel tanks. "I found one," said Bobe, "it's under the sand here. Let's start digging it out." Grzegorz found the other two that were taken by the storm. They were full of fuel so they didn't fly far. Digging out took 3 hours. Everyone was exhausted. "We need to go and have a rest," said Grzegorz, "otherwise we will not have power for tomorrow." Commander agreed. Everyone went to sleep. The next day everyone went outside to check if all equipment is on place. Commander urged them that they needed to start looking for water, so the next missions could maybe start planting and researching the surface of Mars. After 5 hours no one had found anything. 2 more hours later the commander called everyone to come back to the base. Inside the lab everyone looked at the things that they have collected. John Chen, Lucy and Robert Green collected some rocks and sand. We all know what August brought. Grzegorz and Bobby, unlike the others, found something interesting. They found mud. Everyone was surprised that it was also wet in some parts. Some hours later the whole group was digging mud from the gigantic part of Mars that was covered in mud. It truly was a great discovery. Some days later everything was ready for travel. All samples and supplies were properly packed. Dr. Augusta packed his worms in separate boxes and jars so that the situation with their escape would not happen. The entire team was very excited about the upcoming trip. "What will you do when you return?" the commander asked. "Francais will probably be testing his worms," Bobby laughed. "Yes, I will study them, but most of all I will meet my family. I miss them." Everyone confirmed that they felt the same. The days passed quickly and the crew was busy with their preparations and more excited about the journey. The rocket has been cleared of sand and protected against possible sandstorms. The fuel tanks were full and also secured. Food packed and prepared in slings for each travel participant. As the preparation plan was coming to an end and there was less work to do, everyone tried to get more rest. Bobby slept most of the time. Others read the takeoff and landing procedures, and Francais planned future worm research. Grzegorz tried to force his friends to exercise every day, because he knew that they might have muscle problems after returning. Therefore, he prepared a plan of exercises, and the commander made sure that everyone did them. A few days later, the commander called everyone. "I got orders." Everyone looked at him in silence. "We have permission to start and travel. In 3 days we are going home." Chapter 8. It's still a long way home. We have been so busy that it's hard to comprehend that we have been here for nearly 3 years. It was really hard in the beginning, but you get accustomed to the routine and occasional boredom. Zoogie would always joke around that time flies when you're having fun. Well, maybe that's the case when nobody expects that much from you. For the rest of us, there was a lot of important but tedious jobs that had to be done day after day. Grzegorz had the fun job of maintaining the water recovery and sanitary systems. He used to enjoy saying it's a dirty job but someone has to do it. But there's less humor when he says it these days. Our base station or home away from home is a prime example of the finest engineering, but this is a harsh environment and there are more frequent electrical and environmental issues. Robert says that he'll refuse to even change a light bulb when he gets back home. It's taken a toll on each of us. Don't get me wrong, we've worked and trained nearly all of our lives for the honor to be here. It's been great, but we're all ready to go home. This new phase of the mission adds more work to our day, but we have renewed energy and motivation. Years before we started this journey, the mission planners developed detailed guidelines on how to prepare for the trip back to Earth. Exactly how much fuel, food and water. How to pack the samples and safeguard the data collected. This reminds you of incredible precision, imagination and dedication invested in this mission. We all have accomplished something that we can be very proud of. If all goes well, most of us will be just passengers. It'll be a welcome break, but this transition is not as easy for some of us. The pilot, Robert, and co-pilot, John, have the fate of the crew in their hands, and you can sense their stress even if they try not to show it. John likes to say that it's just like riding a bicycle. But you can tell by the amount of time they're spending in the simulator and reviewing key mission parameters, that it's serious work. You never can anticipate what might happen out in space. For that reason, we need the crew to prepare for any type of crisis that may come. Out here, it is a real possibility that a meteorite or space debris might hit the ship. That could mean the loss of precious fuel or oxygen, and we will need to be ready to take care of the ship immediately. If we were back home, we could call in a specialist for any of the thousands of possible problems, but out here there's only our 7-person crew. There are no tow trucks in space. Like in every dangerous profession, you have to train for all of the good but also for all of the bad. An exciting stop on our 9-month trip back to Earth will be our mission to investigate the moon, Phobos. It is the innermost and largest of the 2 moons orbiting Mars. It is an irregularly shaped moon marked with deep craters. Previous landers and probes focused on Mars, so little is known about Phobos. The mission planners knew that we'd pass close to Phobos and wanted to take this opportunity to learn more about this mysterious moon. First, they had to decide if the mission would be crewed or uncrewed. Fortunately, they chose for a rover to explore the moon and send back data. Phobos completes an orbit around Mars in just over 7 hours and is only about 14 miles in diameter. That is one small, fast-moving object. Sending a crew to the moon would be just too dangerous. A rover is perfect choice for the job. This way we avoid possibly having the ship become damaged or the crew getting hurt in case anything goes wrong on Phobos. If the rover finds anything really interesting, maybe we can then send a crewed mission to the moon on the next mission to Mars. After we completed the deployment of the Phobos rover, our attention turned back to the trip home. Robert, John and Brianna called us together to go over the plan. One would think that our trip was planned when Earth and Mars were closest. It's much more complicated than that. It's all about the home and transfer orbit, Robert said. He could tell from all of the confused faces that he'd have to go into a lot more detail. Robert took a deep breath and continued, the home and transfer orbit happens every 26 months. That's when it's the perfect time to leave Mars. John added, it doesn't matter how close the 2 planets are. If we left Mars when Earth was closest, by the time we arrived, the Earth would be long gone. The planets travel on different orbits, velocities and axes. We have to plan our entire mission down to the minute on where the Earth will be, not where it was. Brianna sensed that this was going to take way too much time, so she summarized, look, we have this timed perfectly. Tomorrow, we'll fire the thrusters exactly at 1,300 hours, go straight towards the sun, whip around to pick up velocity and meet up with Earth on the other side. Got it? Good. I felt like she was leaving out a few important details, but at least I understood the plan. Zoogie was surprisingly paying attention during Brianna's crash course on astrodynamics and blurted out, what happens if your calculations are wrong? All eyes slowly turned to the pilot, co-pilot and mission commander. Robert, who was always guilty of providing too much information, said instead of 9 months, it'll take 26 months. The room erupted with the crew shouting questions over each other. Brianna rubbed her temples and said under her breath, this is going to be a long trip. Chapter 9: Coming home. The ship landed. All the astronauts got out. August watched everyone being greeted by their families, which he did not have. As he arrived at his house, after a long flight, he screamed in shock. Because he had no family to look after his house for 5 years, it was a wreck. He went in to examine the damage. He saw a sleeping bag in his living room. Trash was all over the floor. Hey, someone yelled. A man ran out of his bedroom. August cleaned up the garbage the squatter had left. Luckily, nobody came back to live in his house, which he spent all his money cleaning up. Oh, Bobby groaned as he got out of the ship. He could already feel the health effects of being in space. He wondered where Veronica, his fiancée, was. Why wasn't she here to greet him? At his mansion, he FaceTimed her on his iPad. "Why didn't you come to greet me when I returned?" he asked her. "Why didn't you call me on your ship?" "The Mars base had internet," she replied. "Oops," he said, "can you meet me at the Extra Fries restaurant tomorrow?" "No. Sorry. I've got to go talk to my husband." She hung up. Bobby was upset that he wasn't getting special treatment when he came home. Where were the cheering crowds? Why wasn't he, Bobby Brown, getting interviewed on the news? Unlike John Chen and Brianna Mars, he hadn't gotten to meet the President of the United States. The next day, Bobby Brown collapsed and had to go to the hospital. He was paralyzed for a year because he didn't exercise enough on the ship. Robert Greene happily greeted his wife and daughter, who had been only a month old when he had left. Now, she was 4. Almost 5. "Polly," he said. She hid behind her mother. "Mommy, who's that?" she said. "That's Daddy, Polly," her mother said. "You saw him on FaceTime." Polly eventually warmed up to her father after he built her a large dollhouse. 10 years later, the crew reunited again to watch the next mission to Mars. Even Bobby went to the reunion. He seemed to have learned his lesson after getting paralyzed. Although, he did insist on taking all the leftover desserts home with him, and he didn't let anyone else have any. "It seems like the new mission is going along great," said Francesca. "Yes, they will be at the Mars base tomorrow," replied John. "They are planning to collect many samples of Mars rocks." August chimed in. "It took them 8 years to build the rocket because, after the crew spends a year on Mars, the rocket will relaunch and head into the asteroid belt. They will land on Ceres, Vesta, and Pallas. It will be an 8-year trip. They will be spending 6 more years in space," said John. The crew was silent. 4 years in space was hard for them, but 8 years would be very difficult. "After this trip," said Robert, breaking the silence, "they will be able to start working on the Mars colony and send people to live on Mars." Chapter 10, Memories. Ted was very happy. His youth basketball team had just won their game, clinching the playoffs. Basketball on Mars was quite different than on Earth. The hoops had to be raised higher so the 11-year-olds couldn't dunk the ball. The next day was even better. He got an invitation to go to a huge basketball event. There would be the best basketball players in the National Inter-Mars Basketball League Enterprise, NIMBL. Only 1,000 people got invited to attend the live event. Others would have to watch the event on television. They were counting in Earth years even though 1 year on Mars is 687 Earth days long. The 100th year since humans first touched Mars was in just 2 weeks. They were the shortest 14 days Ted had ever lived. Ted was a very intelligent 13-year-old Martian student and one of the best athletes on Mars. There was a month-long break from school for the celebration. All his friends came to his house for a celebratory party. The day of the event, Ted woke up earlier than usual. It would take 30 minutes to get to the event dome and there were snacks to get as well. The game was supposed to be 180 minutes long in total. It was a basketball game played on a special court. There would be 100 referees. Ted thought it was weird, 100 basketballs and 100 hoops. Every team had 100 players. The thing was, each of the players had to wear a costume that looked like one of the astronauts on the first mission to Mars. It was hilarious to watch. Another star player, Eric, was shooting 3-pointers. Other players were bouncing 2 balls at once. The laughter was so loud that you couldn't hear the balls bouncing. It was the loudest 3 hours Ted had ever heard. The best part, according to Ted, was when one of the players threw a ball up and bonked it into the hoop using his head. Ted still had to go to a 3-hour-long ceremony, honoring the first crewed mission to Mars. There was really inexpensive ice cream there, and ice cream was usually really expensive. It usually was for special occasions or, stupidly rich people. $1 Mars dollar is equivalent to $100,000 in the USA. He had only eaten ice cream 10 times in his life before the ceremony. There was even a mini golf course shaped like Johan Chen's head. On one of the holes, you had to get the ball to go through a hole in a cardboard cutout of Johan's head. The most important part though was a theatrical presentation about the first crewed mission to Mars and its legacy to humanity. The end.